Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Fireside chat. I'm Scott Truitt, Vice President of Rasa. I'm really excited to have you here. Imagine a warm roasting fire beside you and cuddle up for the next 20 minutes. It's my privilege and pleasure to introduce my friend Arte. Arte, would you say a few words about who you are and what you've done?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm Arte Merritt. I lead the Conversational AI Partnerships at AWS, and I've been in space for a little over 5 years. I had started an analytics platform for analytics for chatbots and voice assistants prior to this. And thanks for having me. I definitely appreciate this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm thrilled to be able to do this. We can save time for questions at the end. I have the comments up on the side of my screen. So if anything resonates or if there's anything you want to hear us talk about, please do mention it and I'll try to weave it in. We wanted to start with a brief background on how we got into this space. I find it fascinating. Candidly, I joined Rasa in November of last year. I don't know why I keep looking at the date, I guess to figure out the number of months it's been. And I'm going to school on everything I've seen so far today at L3-AI. And I find it just fascinating. Arte, you've been at this for a little while longer, 5+ years. How did you get involved?
Yeah. My background's been in analytics actually for quite a bit. I even had a mobile analytics company in the past, and
Mm.
I was playing around with Slack and realized it was missing the analytics. And one of the great parts about conversational interfaces is that the data is just so much more richer and more actionable than, say, web or mobile. And I'm just a big believer overall in conversational interfaces. I often use the same story when you think of all those videos of little kids swiping on the iPhone and iPad.
Oh,
The
yes.
same thing. Yeah, that same thing happens with devices like Alexa, right? Kids already know how to interact. It is really the future of how we communicate. But the data, because it's all unstructured, it is so rich and actionable. That's what really got me excited in this. And it
Hmm.
was right about the time, Slack and Facebook opened up.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I definitely concur. I see my kids interact with, we're a Siri family, an Apple family. Sorry,
yeah.
no offense to Amazon. I
Right.
hope you all are going to be okay in market. Um, but, I watch them sort of constantly recalibrating their asks and trying to understand how to unlock the features. And it's just absolutely fascinating to study. I came to it as kind of on a lark. I started my career as a designer and thought a lot about interfaces and how humans interact with technology. And then I got pulled into the enterprise space maybe 10 years ago, cloud platforms, developer platforms. And this thing just hit the Venn diagram of everything I consider to be me and to be awesome. I shouldn't associate me with awesome so easily, but you know what I mean. And
Right.
I was just enthralled from the get go. So I find the whole thing fascinating. And maybe that's a good segue into the thing we're here to talk about, which is really enterprise adoption. We're clearly at the very beginning of this story, of this journey, and yet there are so many positive signs already emerging. I'm curious what you see on your side, Artie.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting seeing how things have changed too. When I first started doing this, as mentioned at the beginning there, Slack and Facebook Messenger chatbots are quite popular. In fact, Facebook Messenger
Hmm.
was really all the rage. And then within about a year and a half or so, that all switched to the voice assistants, the Alexa, Google Home. Those became
Hmm.
the big thing, and all these innovation teams moved from Facebook to that. And then over the past 2+ years, it's really been customer service.
Hmm.
That's where we see more of the resources being spent, and enterprises really going deeper. And it's not just for the reasons they're doing customer service chatbots. It's not just for like the deflection and reducing the call volume, but it's also to provide a better experience. Like the
Hmm.
chatbot's available 24/7. You can communicate with it on the channels you prefer. Like you're already on the web, you're already on the mobile,
Hmm.
whatever it is. It's going to where the users are at, and it can also provide so it's basically providing a better user experience for improved customer satisfaction, not just the call deflection. Those are some
Absolutely
of the reasons.
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I find that movement to customer satisfaction, customer experience to be just the most compelling thing of all. It's not about cost savings. It's not about any sort of efficiencies you might wring out of an inefficient system. It's really about how do we differentiate on the experience we provide our customers.
Well,
Yeah.
there was another thing. I remember there's one company I was chatting with where part of the reason they had a chatbot was for compliance too. They had a hard time training their agents not to like say the wrong thing, but then with the chatbot, it could only say what you programmed it to. So that was one of
Yeah.
the other additional
Yeah, and that is a
reasons.
fascinating persona to
Yeah,
consider as we look at these workflows. Where does
yeah,
legal and compliance come in the
yeah,
approval process? And they want to see every line of dialogue that goes out the out the door. So,
yeah,
absolutely fascinating. Um, and we've kind of talked about like why a company should do this and the benefits of it, and even the goals. Um, it's maybe just as interesting to think about how our enterprise is going about doing this, right? It's one thing to recognize the need, recognize the business value. It's a totally different thing to think about, well, how do we reorient around this opportunity and this new technology and truly embrace it?
yeah. I think if folks are embracing it, and as is mentioned, going to where the users really are. That's why you'll see even financial institutions trying to have a chatbot on WhatsApp or WeChat if you're
Mm-hmm.
international. That's where the users are. So go where they are and provide the service on those channels. Some of this started out as innovation teams. Like that's where you saw at the
Yes.
beginning, right? It's
Yep.
innovation teams because that's where it's innovation, right? You're experimenting, you're playing around,
Sure.
and then the trick is how do you get it out to the business units. And
Yep.
for those customer service ones, I think the folks saw that. And I work with companies where they had 200 people on the team just looking at the data. So they're building out large teams around this. Uh, whereas with other things like maybe the voice uh, skills, those haven't quite made it out completely out of
Mm-hmm.
the innovation teams,
Mm-hmm.
partly because of like the user acquisition, discovery, monetization challenges.
Yes. Yeah.
But we are seeing, especially with things like COVID, that accelerated the adoption around customer
Mm-hmm.
service related chatbots. So
Mm-hmm.
um, the folks are definitely embracing this more.
Yeah, yeah, and I think even the economics are becoming almost like unavoidable at this point. And Rishi asks a great question. Apologies if I
Yeah.
mispronounced that, but how do you typically quantify the ROI for such projects? I think this is a hot topic for us. I'm sure for you as well, Artie.
Yeah.
Um,
So when you think about the goals, what are the goals of having the chatbot? So in the customer
mhm,
service world, it's often people are thinking about containment or escalation. It's like two sides of the same thing. Like trying to you have the chatbot solve the user's issue versus going to a live agent. So sometimes well, that's often one of the big ones. But what's also important is what are your overall business goals? Is
mhm,
it you trying to help people book appointments? Is it making a purchase, signing
yep,
up for something,
yep,
or just getting jobs done, like getting people past where they're stuck? And so
mhm,
measuring those KPIs. I remember there's one company I worked with where they said they could optimize for containment, but then that's at the detriment of the customer experience. You could just basically like
right, right,
never
yeah,
escalate, and then you're 100%
yeah,
contained, but all your users
yeah,
are upset, right? Um,
yeah.
so yeah, so the measuring the ROI there is goes a bit to what your goals are.
Agreed.
Uh,
Agreed.
yeah,
I've seen similar things on our end where
yeah,
there's a time to serve or cost to serve element. There's a cost displacement. There's certainly customer satisfaction.
yeah,
Um, it is absolutely fascinating to see each business sort of calibrate their unique requirements based on their situation. I think ultimately we're going to get to a place where the economics of conversational AI and chatbots assistants are going to make most of these problems like impossible not to solve with the technology. You're going to start to look at a thing that costs $7 or €10 to do and say, well, wait, I can automate that with this great tool that I've proven on all these other use cases. I don't see how you avoid it at that stage. I think it kind of takes on a life of its own.
yeah,
Um, yeah,
definitely.
please.
Oh yeah, yeah, no, especially starting with like these low complexity, high volume
Yeah,
tasks, and
yeah.
yeah, getting started. Yeah,
Yep, absolutely. We've been thinking a lot more about the long tail, the heavy tail as Martin Casado on our board calls it,
Yeah.
and that's where the true value lies: the ability to solve these more complex and nuanced problems. It isn't just the top five things, but the full gamut of problems that customers face and need help with. Had a really interesting question in the chat. I don't know if you're watching that as well, Artie, but it's for so I should say 8 days away from moving to Berlin, and my German is pitiful, but I believe it's pronounced voter. If I mispronounced it, please forgive me. But the need to not just focus purely on omnichannel for the idealized reasons, but to focus on very specific channels to optimize the experience there. I can certainly share some insight on our side. Artie, do you have any you want to throw in?
Yeah, happy to hear your thoughts. We actually see the omni-channel approach quite a bit. It's where it's basically what I was mentioning, like going to where the users are, and it depends a bit on your use cases too. Like,
Sure.
There's ones that are better suited for text-based chatbots, IVR, versus your voice assistant, Alexa. So it doesn't mean like just blast it out on everything. It's where are your users? And then if you're looking at international usage, there are particular messaging platforms that are more heavily used outside the US than here. So being on those platforms can be quite helpful, whereas folks in the US might not realize that. Like, why are people building for WhatsApp? And then say, well, in Brazil, it's this. I remember I did a panelist at event, and you can find this. I think it's online. Is WhatsApp accounted for like just shy of 1% of Brazil's GDP? Like, people use it so heavily there. So being on that channel is important. But interesting to hear what you're seeing too.
Yeah, it's certainly most pronounced when you look at the difference between text and voice. And then certainly these sort of emerging plays like Apple Business Chat, which have a totally different interaction paradigm. The logic may be the same, but the way you respond is nuanced. We've done a lot, and in fact, just released a feature around conditional response variations, such as you can use metadata to inform how you respond rather than building all these parallel universes per channel. We're trying to figure out ways that we can sort of whittle that context down for the maker, the builder. Justin, let me read that really quick. Deploying conversational AI to the enterprise often requires recordings of conversations per use case. How do you advise getting this data from customers and setting expectations that it takes time to emulate conversations? Oh, that's very interesting.
There's all sorts of tools. Okay, I mean, there's all sorts of. I mean, I've at AWS now. We have, and then there's obviously other cloud providers and startups and everything that provide all sorts of transcription services to take those audio files, convert it to text, and then run analysis on it. And one of the things that folks do, and they chat about this a little bit later, is this semantic similarity clustering, where you can take what those conversations the agents are having with people. With semantic similarity, it's going to show how similar these phrases or these messages or sentences or questions, whatever it is, are to each other. And you can start to get themes that could be the basis of the intent. And then those actual phrases could be the starting point of your training phrases. And that's one way to get started with these chatbots. It's also, if you're doing IVR related things, it can be useful for the analytics to understand what people are calling about, what are the common issues that are happening. And so you can better help those customers. It goes back to the improving customer satisfaction, not just reducing call volume.
Yeah, we see that on our side as well, where it's not uncommon for someone to say, I have 10 years of call logs, 10 years of data. How do I use that? How do I bring that to bear? So I don't know that anyone's perfected that problem, but I certainly can imagine that AWS has tools available to handle that sort of data. So, absolutely, Levent, your point about compliance and security stands on its own. I don't think we need to hash that out. That's a given. I want to be cognizant of time. We've got about 10 more minutes. I want to talk about the teams that are building these assistants and how you've seen that evolve. We're certainly seeing things on our side as well. I find that part Like, it's one thing to talk about the experience. It's a totally different thing to talk about, well, how do you even begin to build that? And who do
Right.
you need in the room to do it? Right.
Yeah. So when we first started, it was often innovation teams. Like when I was reaching out, it was funny because I was trying to get customers. So I'd reach out to a company and say, "Are you building chatbots?" Like, and but the target was product managers on the innovation team. So they figured they're the ones that are playing around, and it could be one or two people, maybe three, and
Yeah.
they're building the chatbot themselves, or maybe there's a whole bunch of tools for like WYSIWYG chatbots that kind of play around,
Yes.
or other ones
Yep.
that have a combination of like low code, all this stuff. So they use those kind of things, or maybe they even hire someone to build the prototype.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can chat more about the build versus stuff. But
Oh, yes.
over time, the ones that start to really dive deeper into this and really adopt it, those teams can get quite large. Like I mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
we had customers that had between 40 and 200 people just
Yes.
looking at the data. So you have your, like any sort of project, you have your product managers, your engineers, now you start to have data scientists are big, looking at the data, the
Mm-hmm.
conversation designers. That's what's actually neat that came out from this, these, almost like specialized folks that
Yes.
understand the conversation flows. And
Mm-hmm.
we probably heard these same things where people would hire screenwriters and comedians because they
Oh,
understand that
yes. Yeah.
those
The voice
timings.
and the, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So you see, like a lot of the roles I would say, are more traditional, like with any project. But one of the unique ones is starting to see those conversation designers
Mm-hmm.
and more of the data scientists, because the data is quite
Mm-hmm.
valuable and useful for improving these experiences.
Yeah. On the Rasa side, we really focus on the developer workflows first, but very quickly realized as we got into enterprise conversations that we needed to bring the full multidisciplinary team together to do this work. And it
Yeah,
wasn't enough just to segregate it and say, you're over here and you're over here, but to build tools that bring them together. And it's something we're looking at intently right now, as far as like, what is the design prototyping? How does that translate into dialogue, sample dialogue, example conversations? How do we put that in the developer context such that they can begin to build the iteration or build the integration, and then ultimately the feedback loop kind of all happens
exactly.
in one place instead of all these disparate tools. So
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly it. It's not, you can't really do this siloed. You need the input of all the different
Yep.
folks.
Yep.
Yeah, and it
And
is that
legal
iterative
and
process.
compliance
Oh,
and
yeah,
business
exactly. Yeah,
stakeholders.
yeah,
Yeah. And the
yeah.
domain experts. And
Right.
then once you figure that thing out, you need to parallelize it across a large org. I always
Yeah,
joke about my bank that I do business with in the States and how I have 8 or 10 accounts or something ridiculous. And I'm not going to interact with 8 assistants. I want
right.
to be able to move money from one account to the other and pay bills and make things happen. And I expect that assistant to track me and to switch context with me and to carry that context throughout. And
Right.
that isn't something, again, that you segregate off and have this awkward sort of handoff. Again, I'd refer everyone to my colleague Akila's talk earlier, which I thought was fantastic on this subject matter. Um, so yeah, there's no shortage of complexity here. There's no shortage of what I like to think of, like, you isolate some work, but ultimately you do it in a collaborative way.
Yeah.
And how you draw those lines and how you calibrate all that stuff is a fun problem to solve, to say the least.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
So,
definitely.
what else did we want to talk about, Artie? I know we had a big list. What needs to change? Like, what haven't we figured out, or where do we go from here?
Yeah, so there's a couple in terms of changing on the voice side of things. When you talk about voice assistants, there's still a
Yes.
challenge there around user acquisition, discovery, and monetization,
Hmm.
and that I think uh, there's only so much. I mean, obviously, there's startups trying to help on that, but some of it needs to be done by the underlying platforms, the
Hmm.
ecosystems, much like Apple did for apps in iOS,
Hmm.
providing the tools and ecosystem for that. So there's some changes that need to be happening there. Um, I think the NLP, NLU will keep getting better and improve, and then we can start doing more complex things beyond just
Hmm.
the basics. That's going to be exciting. And one of
Hmm.
the things I find really fascinating is the proactive chatbot. So there's a few customers I was working with that they would monitor your behavior on as you're doing whatever it is on the site or inside their app, and it would proactively pop up chatbot to try to help you when it realized you're getting stuck. Like let me
Right,
help you
right.
get past that stuck point, and that stuff starts to get really neat. That more
Absolutely.
predictive, proactive.
Um,
Yeah.
you didn't ask me, but I'm going to weigh in.
Yeah. No, sorry. Yeah, go
Okay.
ahead. Yeah.
I think a lot about how do we build trust in the technology and how do we build trust in that user interaction. I do think it's interesting that customers seem to trust text more than voice. Maybe voice feels a little too real, a little too confessional, a little too like you're exposed. And I think that's an interesting problem to solve that bears research and continued work to improve that. I find the issue of abuse and hateful, spiteful language to be a massive issue. It's something we talk about a lot at Rasa of how do we help people build inclusive and equitable products, even if they don't intend to and don't know
Yeah.
to, and how do they handle these sorts of common things? Our co-founder Alan told us about a bot that he created a while ago, his carbon bot that was just about trying to help people buy carbon offsets when they fly,
Yeah.
and the amount of vitriol and just terrible,
Wow.
terrible things said to it. And this is about as innocuous as it gets.
Yeah.
So imagine what a high scale, high traffic bot gets. And we may not be able to solve that in code. That may just be a problem for humanity. But as we begin to blur those lines, I would love to see us try and do something there.
Yeah, there's the most famous one a few years back was the Taybot, right? Microsoft's,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
they had to pull it down within the first day because people were
Hours was,
abusing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
And it was learning from that abuse. Yeah,
But
yeah.
from what I understand, I was at a talk where there's one of the woman who was leading AI there that talked about it, that it was a concerted effort that these folks
Hmm.
purposely went after.
Yes.
So it's hard for that. But when I first started doing this, I remember there was a retailer that they said the same thing. They did take the chatbot down because people were abusing it a bit
Yeah,
too much,
yeah.
which is sad. There's the flip side of this, though, is the chatbot's trying to like understand like the person's emotions and all too. That's
Hmm.
where you start getting some
Hmm.
neat things too. Like how can you maybe adjust your messaging based on
Right.
their sentiment or emotion.
The language they use and how they refer to things that you might have a different phrase for internally.
Yeah,
I just, again, I think the word of the day for me is fascinating. That's been my general sense of everything going on today. I'm thrilled that we're able to come together as a community and talk about these important issues. I want to get to one more question. Levent asked about on-the-fly translations.
yeah,
I can say from our side that multi-language assistance is top of mind for many of our customers. We're all looking at this problem and trying to figure out what the best way to do it is. And I think the most interesting thing is that virtually every customer I've talked to about this is focused on providing the same experience across multiple languages. There isn't this
yeah.
sort of acceptance of, well, one's just naturally going to be better because that's our default, and this other one, well, we'll try. But we really want to have an on par experience.
Oh yeah. No, I saw, especially in Facebook, outside of English, all the Romance languages are in the top 10. You
Hmm.
saw quite a bit of Arabic, Russian, Mandarin, double byte characters. You see it
Hmm.
all, and it goes sort of to that, going where the users are, and this is pretty global, international. In terms of
Hmm.
like the voice transcriptions, there definitely are. Like I mentioned, the cloud services do provide these in real time.
Hmm.
And he was asking about, it looks like again, the redactions. There's tools like to do PII redactions. So there's an NPM
Hmm.
module that folks use, redact PII. There's stuff you can do around that. And then like Alexa and Google Assistant, they're doing that translation for you. But this would be more if
Yes. Yeah.
IVR voice. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think watch this space. I expect a lot
Yeah.
to change and mature here in the very
Yeah.
near future. So I think we're about to end. Yeah, I just see the prompt there.
Yeah.
If we didn't get to your question, or if you have anything else, you can find me on Twitter at SCT and at Arte Merritt. Be
Yeah.
happy to talk there, or find us here the rest of the day.
Yeah. I appreciate being part of this. Thanks for including me. And
Thank you.
you
And
said, yeah,
Arte,
happy
you have
answering.
another session coming today, so we
Yeah,
can
yeah,
all
yeah,
bombard
definitely.
him there.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Bring the
Awesome.
questions there. Follow up.
Perfect. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks.
Really appreciate your time, and your questions are fantastic.